This is Alex Mercer, broadcasting on what might be the last working transmitter in this entire region. If you're hearing this, then your radio still has a heartbeat. Consider that a miracle. I don't know how long this signal will hold, or how long the small generator powering my setup has before it coughs its last spark. But you deserve to know what's happening out there, because something has gone terribly, impossibly wrong. And it started just a few hours ago. I was on the outskirts of Halden City when the first flicker hit. It was subtle, street lights dimming like they were suddenly tired, neon signs sputtering as if exhaling for the final time. At first I thought it was a rolling brownout, something to complain about but not panic over. The kind of thing the grid sometimes does when the heat waves ramp up, or the infrastructure groans under too much demand. But then the traffic lights died all at once. Every car on the highway stalled simultaneously, headlights winking out like someone blew out a row of candles. Even the electric billboards froze mid-frame, their screens stuck in a blank, ghostly gray. I remember the silence, not the usual urban silence, that faint, constant hum of engines, fans, compressors. No, this was an empty, unnatural quiet, the kind that presses against your ears, makes your heartbeat sound too loud. People got out of their cars, confused, squinting at their phones only to find dead glass staring back at them. No signal, no touchscreen response, no battery indicator, nothing. And then, in less than a second, everything went dark. The entire city, millions of lights, signs, machines, just blinked out. I mean everything. Buildings, hospitals, traffic systems, elevators, subways, emergency lights, backup systems, all of it. I looked toward the skyline and saw Halden's towers turn into black silhouettes, the kind of shapes you only see during a total eclipse. But this wasn't an eclipse. This was the world exhaling and forgetting how to inhale. People screamed, not in terror, but confusion. Some laughed nervously, assuming it was temporary. Others tried car keys, phones, radios, anything, but no device showed even the faintest spark of life. Not even battery-powered flashlights worked. That's when I realized this wasn't a grid failure. This wasn't a cyber attack, or a transformer explosion, or a citywide malfunction. This was everything. Everything electronic. Everything with a circuit, or a motor, or a microchip. Dead. When the sky darkened into night, an actual night, the first one most people had ever truly seen without light pollution, it settled in. Whatever happened wasn't just local, this was global. I could see stars I'd never seen before, scattered across the sky like broken glass. The Milky Way smeared across the darkness like a bruise. People stared upward, some in awe, others in fear, finally realizing how small we really are when the lights go out. I made my way toward the radio tower on foot. I had to climb 6 flights of stairs in total darkness, feeling along the railing and praying it didn't give way beneath me. Every single studio was dead. Every console dark, computers cold. But in the emergency storage room, I found an old oil-based generator, one of the ancient backup units that predated the digital models. It took me nearly 2 hours to get it running, but when it finally sputtered awake, it was like listening to a dying animal trying its best to live. That generator is the only reason you can hear me now. Outside, the world feels different. Not just darker, heavier, like the air itself has weight. There's a tension crawling under the silence, a vibration that makes the hairs on your arms stand up. I can't explain it. Maybe it's fear, maybe it's instinct, or maybe when you remove the lights, the screens, the noise, when you pull the entire world into darkness, something else wakes up in that empty space. I walked through the streets before coming up here. People huddled around candles and matches, terrified of wasting them. Some cried, some prayed, some argued. A few tried to loot stores, but without electric locks or sliding doors. Most places had already been picked through by panicked hands. Children clung to their parents, their faces lit only by the trembling glow of a single flame. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, were shadows stretching farther than they should. Streets felt narrower, alleys felt deeper. The darkness felt alive. I don't know how widespread this is, but my guess, all of it. Every city, every country, every continent. Not a blackout, not a grid failure, a full systemic death of technology itself. Planes must have fallen. Ships must have gone dead in the water. Satellites. I can't even imagine what's happening up there. And the worst part? No one knows why. No one is giving orders. No officials, no emergency broadcasts, no instructions. We are utterly, completely alone. I'm going to stay on the air as long as the generator allows. I'll report what I see, what I hear, what changes, what doesn't. Because something tells me this isn't just an outage. It feels coordinated, designed, like someone or something flipped a switch. And if that's true, then the blackout isn't the end. It's the beginning. So stay tuned, if you can. Stay calm. Stay close to the light you have left. And if you're out there listening, you're not the only one awake in this darkness. This is Alex Mercer, still broadcasting, still watching, still waiting. This is Alex Mercer, still broadcasting from the Halden Tower. And if you're hearing this, it means you've made it through the first hour, maybe two, of whatever this event really is. I wish I had good news for you, but the truth is, the night is unraveling faster than any of us imagined. If the blackout was the match, the darkness is the fire, and we're standing in a world we never learned to survive without electricity holding our hand. I stepped out onto the balcony of the tower a few minutes ago. The city beneath me is a void. No streetlights, no headlights, no neon bleeding color into the night. Just shadowed silhouettes of buildings and the faint flicker of candles scattered across windows like stars caught in glass cages. It's strange. In daylight, Halden felt dead. But in this absolute darkness, it feels alive in the wrong way. Like the city is breathing, waiting. The first thing I noticed was the sound. It's not what you hear, it's what you don't. No AC units humming, no cars passing, no sirens cutting through the night, no background buzz, a planet of silence. And yet, beneath that silence, something new, a low rolling hum that you don't hear so much as feel, like a distant engine that isn't really there, or like the world has a heartbeat now, slow and heavy. When I left the building earlier to survey the streets, the darkness was so complete that even my own hands vanished as soon as I lowered them. And I wasn't the only one who felt vulnerable. People were gathered in groups around tiny flames, tea candles, lighters, matches, anything that could fight back the black. Some whispered, some cried, others just stared at the sky, trying to understand how the stars could shine so brightly while the world below them collapsed. But then, the panic began. It started small, shouting down the street, the kind you hear when a fight breaks out, a scuffle, a struggle. But then more voices joined. Screams carried down the empty roads, echoing so violently they bounced from building to building until it sounded like the entire city was calling out at once. I ran toward the noise, slower than I'd like to admit, trying to navigate the darkness without tripping. When I turned into West Hill Avenue, I saw something that still doesn't make sense. Light. Not from fire, not from electricity. It was a pulsing glow, faint, bluish white, flickering from inside a shop window like lightning bottled behind glass. But when I approached the shop, the glow died instantly, like it sensed me coming. I don't know what caused it. No device should be able to emit light right now. Phones are dead. Batteries are dead. Street lights are dead. So why did that glow exist? And why did it vanish the second I got close enough to touch the window? Before I could investigate, more screams tore down the street. A group of people sprinted out of a diner, stumbling in the dark, bumping into each other. One woman fell, scraping her hands raw on the pavement. I helped her up and asked what happened, but she couldn't speak at first. She just gasped like the night had punched the air out of her lungs. When she finally got her words back, all she could say was, "The dark is moving." At first, I didn't understand. Shadows don't move on their own. Darkness doesn't behave like a living thing. But then, she told me what she saw. They were eating in the diner when the lights cut out. Pitch black. For a few seconds, everyone just froze. Then matches flared to life. Candle flames flickered. People tried to calm each other, but while the room was dimly lit, they could still see, could still cling to that thin thread of normal. Then something happened to the flame on their table. It stretched, like someone pulled its light toward the far corner of the room. The flame didn't flicker toward wind or movement. It leaned toward the darkness, like the dark was pulling at it. That's when she saw the shadow in the corner. Taller than a man, no shape, no face, just absence. A hole in the room. And it grew, not quickly, not dramatically, slowly, the way ink spreads on paper. She said the candlelight bent toward it. Bent. As if gravity belonged to the darkness, not the flame. That's when the entire diner erupted into panic. People fled, chairs were flipped, matches dropped, and the second the lights went out again, total black, she said she heard something in that corner, not breathing, not footsteps. Something like a low whisper. I know. It sounds impossible. It is impossible. But tonight is a night where impossible things keep happening. When I got back to the tower and checked the generator, the air around it felt warmer. Not the engine, the room. As if the darkness outside was pushing against the building, pressing heat inward. When I opened the door to the broadcast room, the shadows in the corners seemed deeper than they should be. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something shift in the reflection of the window behind me. Maybe it's exhaustion, maybe paranoia, maybe something else. The roads below are getting louder now, not from machines, those are gone, but from people. Arguments, cries for help, fights over candles, over batteries that don't even work anymore, over the fear that something is out there in the dark with us, something we were never meant to experience because electricity kept it at bay for over a century. It's wild how dependent we were on light without ever realizing it. Artificial day, reflecting in windows, washing across concrete, drowning the night so thoroughly that real darkness became a myth. Now that the myth is here, it's hungry. As the first night stretches on, the fires have begun. You can see them scattered across the city, burning trash cans, burning tires, bonfires built from broken furniture. They're spreading slowly, not like riots, more like desperation. People are clinging to the idea that flame equals safety, that brightness equals protection. But I'm not sure anymore. After seeing what I saw on West Hill Avenue, I'm not sure fire is the comfort people think it is. Something strange happens when you're surrounded by this kind of darkness. You start hearing things. You start imagining movements in places where there shouldn't be movement. Shadows feel thicker, corners feel deeper, and the longer the blackout stretches, the more the night feels less like an absence of light, and more like a presence filling the world. A living presence, a watching one. I don't know what caused this blackout, but I know this: it wasn't an accident. This wasn't infrastructure failure. This wasn't solar activity. This wasn't human error. Something turned the lights off. Something took the power. And now, in the silence, in the star-soaked sky, in the living dark, it feels like we're not alone. Stay close to your flames. Stay together if you can. And if you hear something in the dark, don't go toward it. This is Alex Mercer, still broadcasting, still watching the night, still waiting for what comes next. This is Alex Mercer, still broadcasting from Halden Tower. And if you're hearing this transmission, it means you've survived the first hour, maybe two, of whatever this event truly is. I wish I could tell you things are settling, that the power would return any minute, that the world is simply rebooting itself after a glitch. But the truth is colder than this night, and heavier than the silence hanging over the city. The blackout wasn't the disaster, no. It was just the opening act. The darkness that followed, the kind we haven't seen in a century, is spreading like a living thing, swallowing every familiar corner until the world feels alien. If the power outage was the match, then the darkness is the wildfire, and every one of us is standing in a world we never really learned to navigate without electricity holding our hand. When I stepped out onto the balcony just minutes ago, Halden looked like a ghost of itself. A city without lights is not a city. It's a silhouette carved into the night, a jagged mountain range of steel and concrete rising out of an ocean of black. No street lamps marking the roads, no headlights gliding through intersections, no neon signs bleeding color into the air. Even the reflections on the glass skyscrapers are gone. All that's left are faint, trembling dots of candlelight floating in windows, tiny artificial stars caught behind glass, as if humanity is trying to imitate the sky out of fear of being truly blind. And the strangest part? In the daytime, Halden felt dead, but in this kind of darkness, it feels alive. Not with people, with something else. Like the whole city is breathing slow, deep breaths, waiting for something to shift. What struck me first wasn't the sight. It was the absence of sound. We've never lived in true silence, not really. We're used to the endless hum, air conditioners rattling, generators humming, cars crawling across asphalt, sirens in the distance, TVs leaking noise through thin apartment walls. But tonight, that entire background orchestra has vanished, and what replaces it is unnerving. It's not the peaceful silence of a countryside night. It's a hollow one, an unsettling vacuum where sound should exist. And beneath that vacuum, something else. A low, rolling hum you don't quite hear so much as feel through your bones. Like a distant engine thudding miles underground. Or like the earth itself has developed a heartbeat slow enough to unsettle, yet strong enough to notice if you stand still long enough. Earlier tonight, when I walked down to the street level to check on the neighborhoods near the tower, I realized how completely our eyes were never meant for this kind of darkness. The second I stepped away from the faint glow behind me, my own hands disappeared from sight. The pavement turned into an infinite black sheet. Buildings dissolved into pillars of shadow. People huddled in small circles around lighters and candles, their faces glowing orange, their eyes wide, their breaths shaky. Some whispered prayers, others muttered to themselves, and a few stared straight upward as if the sky held the answers. The stars brighter than any of us have ever seen them, piercing through the dark like needles of cold silver. For the first time in their lives, most people finally understood how much we took artificial light for granted. But the quiet didn't last. It started with one scream, sharp, sudden, echoing through the empty street like glass shattering. Then another, then a chorus. Voices bouncing off the facades of dead buildings until it felt like the entire city was shouting at once. I ran toward the sound, stumbling over curbs I couldn't see, nearly falling more than once. When I reached West Hill Avenue, I saw something I still can't explain. A glow, faint, bluish white. Not fire, not electricity. A pulse, like light trapped behind foggy glass, flickering inside the window of a small hardware shop. It shouldn't have been there. Phones are dead. Batteries are dead. Even the emergency lights in hospitals went dark the moment the blackout hit. Nothing should glow, nothing should pulse. And yet, something did. But the moment I got close, the light vanished, snuffed out as if it sensed me coming, like it recoiled. Before I could process that, another wave of screams erupted behind me. A group of people burst through the doors of a diner, stumbling blindly, crashing into tables and trash cans and each other. One woman fell so hard her palms scraped bloody on the asphalt. When I helped her stand, she couldn't speak, just gasped for air as though the darkness itself had strangled her. And when she finally managed to form words, her voice trembled with something beyond fear. "The dark is moving," she whispered. At first, I thought she meant shadows cast by fire or panicked imagination. But then she told me what happened inside the diner. The moment the lights cut out, everyone froze. Matches were lit. Candles sparked to life. People tried to calm each other, clinging to those tiny islands of warmth. But the woman noticed something impossible. The flame on her table leaned, not toward a breeze, not because of movement, but toward the darkest corner of the room, as though the flame was being pulled, drawn, like the darkness was exerting a gravity of its own. Then she saw it, a shape in the corner, not a person, not an object, just a tall, shifting mass of black, an absence rather than a presence, something that wasn't supposed to exist in the lit world. As the candlelight bent toward it, the shadow swelled, spreading across the floor like ink flooding a page. When the lights finally died completely, the entire diner erupted into chaos. She swears she heard something in that black corner. Not breathing, not footsteps. Something like a low whisper brushing the inside of her ears. I know how that sounds. It sounds like panic-induced hallucination. But the problem is, tonight, things that shouldn't be happening are happening everywhere. When I returned to the tower to check the backup generator, I felt warmth radiating not from the machine but the room itself. Like the darkness outside was pressing against the building, trying to seep inside. When I entered the broadcast room, the corners looked deeper than usual, like shadows with weight. And for a split second, I thought I saw movement in the reflection on the glass behind me. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe I'm losing my grip. Or maybe something is happening that we never prepared for. Outside, the roads are growing louder, not with engines, but with voices, arguing, crying, calling for help, fighting over candles, matches, flashlights that don't even work anymore. People are terrified of the dark in a way humans haven't been since ancient times. Fires are appearing across the city. Trash bins, scrap wood, broken chairs. each flame a desperate attempt to recreate the artificial daylight we took for granted. But after what I saw earlier, I don't know if fire is truly the safety people think it is, because whatever this darkness is, it behaves like it notices light, like it hungers for it. And here's what's truly terrifying. When you strip the world of electricity, the night stops being just a lack of light. It becomes something else. Something with depth, something with intent, a presence. I don't know what caused the blackout, but I can feel this in my bones. This wasn't a random failure. This wasn't a storm, a hack, a solar flare. Something turned the lights off. Something took the power. And now, in this living dark, it feels like something is watching. This is Alex Mercer, still broadcasting, still listening, still waiting to understand what comes next. This is Alex Mercer, still broadcasting, still gripping the last fragile thread of light in a city that feels like it's being swallowed whole by the dark. I've been sitting here staring out over Halden, what used to be a city, what used to be alive, and the longer I look, the more I'm beginning to understand that what's happening out there isn't just some local catastrophe. It isn't a power grid failure. It isn't a storm knocking out transformers. It isn't something that a few dozen engineers somewhere can flip a switch and repair. No. The truth is seeping in slowly, like ink bleeding through paper. Whatever hit us, hit everyone. This blackout isn't ours alone. It's global. And the first night of it is unraveling into something humanity might never get back from, assuming any of us are even still here when the sun rises, if it rises at all. Over the past hour, I've caught fragments of transmissions, thin, ghost-like pieces of communication, drifting through the static as if the voices on the other end are speaking from beneath miles of frozen water. Some signals came from the mountain towns to the north, others from the tiny fishing communities along the coast, and one, just one, from a pilot whose voice sounded like he was describing a nightmare he hadn't yet woken up from. Every voice said the same thing. Lights dead, engines cold, batteries drained, radios dying faster than they should. But they also described something else, something not so easily explained. They talked about the night itself, how it felt like it was changing, deepening, reacting, how the darkness wasn't just absence. It was presence, alive, watching, thickening in the corners of the world like something growing teeth. The earliest transmission came from a naval officer somewhere off the eastern coast. You could hear the training in his voice, the discipline, the instinct to stay calm. But beneath it was confusion, real confusion, the kind that even war can't prepare you for. He explained that the very moment the blackout hit, the ship lost everything. Not just the main power grid. Navigation went cold. Communication systems died. Emergency lights flickered once and vanished. Even the backup generators, even the battery-powered lifeboats, everything just stopped. At first, the crew suspected sabotage, or maybe an EMP or some kind of coordinated attack. But then he described what the ocean looked like afterward, and that's the part I can't shake from my mind. He said the water didn't just look dark, it swallowed the horizon. It was black, darker than moonless night, darker than spilled ink. It didn't reflect the sky. It didn't shimmer. It didn't move the way water should. When he shined a flashlight down toward the railing, the beam didn't reach the surface. It didn't dim. It didn't scatter. It just ceased to exist, as if the darkness reached up and consumed it before it could fall. Then he heard something tap the side of the ship. Not wind, not waves, a deliberate tap, like knuckles against steel, slow, testing, as if whatever was out there knew they were blind and was curious or hungry. He didn't get to finish his report. A burst of static cut him off, and the frequency went dead. I don't know if that saved him or silenced him for a reason. The second transmission came from a high-altitude pilot. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't screaming. He just sounded hollow. He said he'd been mid-flight when every instrument in the cockpit died at the same time. No flicker, no warning. One moment the plane was cruising. The next, it was a metal coffin drifting through an ocean of black. He said the darkness inside the cockpit became thicker than the darkness outside, like the shadows themselves were condensing. When he tried flipping the switches, they didn't click. When he tried the emergency flashlight, it stayed dead. The radio was nothing but a hiss. And then, he felt something inside the cockpit. Not touching him, not brushing him, just close. Standing somewhere behind him in the black, breathing, watching. He said he kept his eyes locked on the windshield because every instinct in his body told him that if he turned around, if he looked into the darkness behind him, he wouldn't survive long enough to finish his sentence. Before his transmission dissolved into white noise, he whispered one last thing. The stars are gone. The sky is empty. And then he vanished into the static, like so many others. The third transmission came from a faraway city, one that should have been brighter than Halden on its best night. A skyline of neon, glass, and light stacked into the clouds. The voice on the line belonged to a young woman, and she spoke with an eerie calmness that made the hair on my arms stand up. She said the blackout hit during rush hour. Traffic froze, elevators locked, billboards flickered once, twice, then went dead. The entire city blinked and forgot how to wake up again. But what she described happening on the streets afterward feels like something pulled straight from a nightmare. She said the shadows began to stretch. Slowly at first, accidentally, like illusions caused by panic. But then they started moving against the direction of the crowd. Shadows that didn't match any object or person nearby. Shadows sliding across the pavement like spilled tar, climbing walls, clinging to the sides of buildings. She said one shadow slid up a brick wall and stayed there, lingering like it was watching the chaos below. Someone tried taking a picture of it, hoping the flash would prove it was nothing. But the moment the flash lit up the alley, somebody screamed. A raw, primal scream that punched through the radio even from miles away. And then, according to her, the shadow peeled away from the wall and moved toward them. Her transmission ended abruptly, like the others. Static, a crack, then silence. It feels like the world is disappearing piece by piece. Like every signal I catch is someone's last moment. And here I am in Halden Tower, surrounded by a darkness that feels older than humanity, listening to the final whispers of a world that might already be slipping out of our hands. These stories, if they're true, suggest that the first night of this blackout is something far bigger than we can understand. Not just a loss of power, but a shift in the very rules the world operates on. A crack in reality, a rewriting of darkness itself. And the most terrifying part is that the night is far from over. We still have hours, long, suffocating hours, before sunrise. And none of us know what the city will look like when the light finally returns, if it returns at all. This is Alex Mercer, still on the air, still whispering into the dark, still hoping someone out there is hearing this as we try to understand what this first night is becoming. This is Alex Mercer, still broadcasting, still alive, and still staring out across a city that feels less like a place and more like a memory fading into the dark. If you're hearing this, any of you, it means the transmitter I rigged from the old emergency grid is still holding. It means the darkness hasn't reached this tower. Not yet. It's the second night since the blackout, and something has changed. Something subtle at first, and now impossible to ignore. Last night, the darkness simply existed. Vast, heavy, unnatural, but still. Tonight it's behaving differently. It's shifting, curling, searching. The dark isn't just the absence of light anymore. It's an active presence, like something unseen is brushing against the edges of every window, testing every doorway, studying the structures we once believed protected us. I've been watching it for hours, and each time I look away, even for a second, it feels like it's moved closer, like it's learning the shape of the world. And this isn't just here in Halden. The transmissions I picked up tonight were different. Yesterday they were filled with panic, confusion, disbelief. Tonight they're quieter, more focused, as if the people sending them have begun to understand they're describing not a disaster, but an enemy, a living, adapting force. The first signal came from a man somewhere in the outskirts of New York City. The message was short, barely a minute long, but the silence surrounding his words said more than anything he could have described. He said Manhattan was already gone, not destroyed, gone. He said the skyline vanished into a wall of darkness so thick it erased entire blocks like ink spilled over a map. He said rescue helicopters tried to hover near the coast, but every light, every spotlight, every emergency beacon flickered out the second they approached the shoreline. And then, the rotors stopped altogether. Engines silent. The machines just fell. No flame, no sound. Just dropped straight into the blackness, swallowed before they hit the water. The man said the darkness at the edge of the city wasn't stationary. It pulsed, like a heartbeat, like breath. And with every pulse, the border of the blackout crept forward another few meters, consuming the streets. He said people tried to run toward the bridges, but the bridges were already gone too. Structure intact, but visually erased, like the dark was bending around them. He said you could walk onto one and feel the concrete under your feet, but your own shadow disappeared, and once it did, you were gone next. He didn't explain how he escaped. The transmission cut off the moment he whispered, "The city isn't empty. The dark is wearing it like skin." The second transmission came 4 minutes later from Tokyo. A woman, breathing hard, speaking fast, clearly running. She said the metros were the first to fall. The tunnels went dark instantly, but it wasn't the blackout itself. They had backup systems, emergency generators, thousands of LED strips. None of them flickered. They were simply erased. People inside described the darkness as solid, like an opaque liquid flooding the tunnels at impossible speed. It swept through the underground rail lines and rose through the stairwells, like it was hunting in confined spaces first. She said people fled upward into the streets, but when they reached the surface, the silence was unreal. No wind, no hum of vending machines, no neon, no traffic, no distant city noise. A silence so complete it pressed on their ears. And then she said something I can't stop hearing. The shadows of the buildings were moving against the architecture. Not the shadows of the buildings. She said the shadows on the buildings were crawling upward, sliding across the glass like they were climbing. She kept saying she couldn't tell where the real night ended and the other night began. The call broke off mid-sentence. Just a faint dragging sound, like something was scraping stone. Hours passed before I caught another signal, This one, it chilled me more than any of the others. It was from someone in Berlin. A scientist, maybe. Calm voice, steady tone, trying to analyze instead of panic. She said that shortly after the blackout, atmospheric sensors around the city detected massive shifts in air density. She described it like an invisible pressure front, something moving through the city without disturbing objects, without causing wind, just compressing the air. She said entire neighborhoods on the east side fell silent within minutes. No screams, no calls for help, just silence. Like all the sound was sucked out of the area. When emergency teams tried to approach, they reported seeing buildings flicker, actual structures flickering like bad video frames, before stabilizing again. She thought it was a hallucination, until 3 of her colleagues stepped into a flickering zone and vanished without a trace. Not collapsed, not dissolved, vanished. She said the darkness in Berlin seemed to be editing the environment, rewriting the edges of reality like corrupted data. Her last words were, "It's mapping us, it's studying us, and it's learning faster than we can run." The final transmission before my equipment overheated came from Dubai. The voice was from someone high, either a tower resident or a helicopter pilot who had already landed. He said the entire city lit up for a split second right before going dark. Like every building fired every last watt through its grid. Then everything died at once. He said the darkness in the deserts around the city wasn't behaving like darkness anywhere else. He described it as a fluid veil, drifting across the dunes with shape and mass. He said the Burj Khalifa was still standing, but its shadow was stretching outward across the sand, even though there was no light source to cast it. The shadow extended for miles, forming branching tendrils that crept toward the highways. When he tried shining a flare toward one of the tendrils, the light dimmed instantly, like the darkness reached up and crushed the brightness out of the fire. He said the desert was swallowing sound too. Shouts dissolved into nothing the moment they left your mouth. He said he could see figures in the distance, silhouettes walking among the dunes. But when he tried calling out to them, they didn't move. They didn't react. They didn't even turn their heads, like they were waiting or listening to something deeper in the dunes. All these transmissions, they paint a pattern, a terrifying one. This darkness isn't just a blackout. It's not absence. It's an entity, or a system, or a force that's adapting to each environment differently. In cities with height, it climbs. In cities with tunnels, it hunts upward. In coastal cities, it erases horizons. In deserts, it moves like weather. And everywhere, it silences sound, sight, heat, life. The second night is different. The dark is no longer settling into the world. It's moving through it, feeling its way across continents, learning our structures, our signals, our voices. It's reacting to light sources, sound waves, movement, curious, almost intelligent. And we're starting to realize we're not dealing with nature, or physics, or any phenomenon we've ever prepared for. We're dealing with something that understands us more with every passing hour. And if this is only night 2, I don't know how many more nights the world has left. This is Alex Mercer, still here, still holding on to the static of this dying radio, still staring out into a night that seems to have gained a mind of its own. It's the 3rd night since the world went dark. And if the last 2 nights felt like something was hunting humanity, tonight feels like the first time we pushed back. Not enough to win, not enough to claim territory, but enough to remind ourselves that the darkness isn't invincible. There are cracks, there are weaknesses, and tonight, we began to find them. I've spent the evening moving between rooftop vantage points, scanning streets with the little light I could salvage, candle clusters, flares, even a searchlight rigged from old construction equipment. The effect was immediate. The darkness, which had so far flowed like liquid through the city, recoiling only when it met walls or narrow alleys, hesitated. It slowed. Edges that had once advanced in perfect black folds now wavered like smoke caught in a gust of wind. I watched from above as tiny bands of survivors, armed with improvised lamps, mirrored this effect below. Light is a weapon, yes, but a delicate one. Every flicker matters. Every shadow that falls beyond the glow is a threat. And tonight, for the first time, we began to understand that light can create sanctuary, however fleeting. The first transmission I intercepted came from a town to the north, a place with a power grid partially shielded from whatever pulse knocked out the rest of the world. They were improvising. Garden floodlights, car headlights chained together, even mirrors reflecting the moonlight into alleyways. The voice on the radio was trembling, yes, but it carried a mix of awe and determination. They described the darkness approaching, rolling over the streets like a tide. And then, against these bright arcs, the shadows recoiling, curling back, unable to cross the illuminated lines. The operator called it tentative retreat, though I think he meant hesitation. For the first time, humans weren't just reacting. They were shaping the battlefield. A second signal came from the coast, where lighthouses were still standing, their beams piercing the night. A small team had gathered along the cliffs to watch the ocean for changes, and their report was staggering. When the first wave of darkness rolled in from the water, the lighthouse beams didn't just hold it off. They seemed to push it back into the waves. The darkness recoiled in folds, like smoke blown from a candle. And for the first time in 3 nights, someone on this planet could see a force retreating. The team described flashes from emergency flares and boat-mounted spotlights supplementing the beams. They claimed the black water itself quivered as the light stretched across the horizon, and the shadows of the waves were lifted, disrupted, broken. For minutes, it was almost beautiful. Human ingenuity, carving temporary constellations into a city and sea that had been swallowed by night. Here in Halden, I tried to replicate the effect. I rigged every lamp I could find onto the tower balcony, arranged mirrors to focus light down the streets, even rigged a few improvised arc lights from the generator. For the first hour, I watched the dark hesitate at the edges of the illuminated streets. It moved slowly, uncertainly, like it had to learn new rules. It reacted to every change in brightness, every flare, every flicker. And every time I adjusted the lights or added new beams, it faltered, shifted, and retreated just enough to keep me from feeling entirely hopeless. The knowledge is terrifying in its clarity. Whatever this force is, it adapts, it studies, it remembers. But for now, light is something it cannot immediately overcome. The strange thing is that these safe zones aren't permanent. Darkness doesn't just stop. It waits, watches, reshapes. I've seen shadows detach from buildings entirely, crawling toward gaps in light like water finding a crack in a dam. I've seen flares ignite and burn for seconds before the dark snuffed them out at a distance, like some unseen hand reaching across the city. It's learning us as we learn it. This isn't just a blackout. This is a war of perception, of physics, of light and absence, and we are only beginning to understand the rules. I caught a transmission from a group inside what used to be Berlin's central district. They had managed to electrify a block with generators, floodlights, and improvised mirrors. They were in awe and terrified. The darkness approached the illuminated zone like a predator circling a cage. It would touch the edges and pause, tremble even, before retreating and trying another path. They called it testing, like it was probing for weaknesses. But every time the humans reinforced the lights, it faltered. The block held. The shadows couldn't penetrate. And that is the first true victory humanity has seen in these 3 nights. It's small, fragile, temporary, but it's a victory. Another broadcast came from Tokyo, where survivors had clustered on the tops of skyscrapers, using reflective panels to direct early sunlight into the gaps of alleys and streets below. They reported seeing the darkness bend around the beams, unable to advance along paths illuminated with even faint daylight. It wasn't permanent, they said. Once the sun set, the darkness would creep back, slower than before, but inevitably. Still, even this small reprieve gave them time. Time to gather supplies, evacuate trapped survivors, and fortify their positions. They were using light to carve temporary islands of survival. And they knew, instinctively, that even the smallest beam might be the difference between life and total annihilation. Here in Halden, I can see similar patterns emerging. Fires flare across rooftops. Candles in windows form constellations of safety. Street lamps powered by scavenged generators hold back creeping shadows. Even a single flashlight, if wielded correctly, seems to push the darkness from hallways, alleys, and stairwells. But I know it's fragile. The night is patient. It waits for mistakes, for flickers, for anything that weakens the glow. And for every safe island, the shadows are learning how to circumvent it, how to probe and adapt. The second part of the night is approaching, the hours when the world is darkest and most alive. If the first night was panic, the second was fear. Tonight is tentative defiance. Humans are experimenting, learning, resisting. But the darkness is intelligent. It's studying every method, watching every reaction, moving in ways we don't yet understand. It's hunting still, but now, for the first time, it faces resistance. And the knowledge of that resistance brings hope, tinged with terror, because we know this force does not forget, and it does not forgive. For anyone listening tonight, if you can hold a beam of light, if you can build a fire, if you can reflect the sun, even for a few minutes, it matters. The night is alive, and it notices. But tonight, we've seen that it can also be pushed back. And for the first time in 3 nights, we know that the darkness is not unstoppable. We've discovered its weakness, however small, however temporary. This is Alex Mercer, still broadcasting, still testing the night, still learning the rules of a world that has never been without light. And for the first time, seeing that maybe, just maybe, humanity has a chance to fight back. This is Alex Mercer, still broadcasting from the Halden Tower, still alive, still staring into a night that refuses to be measured or understood. If you've been following these nights, then you know the progression. Night 1, the blackout arrived, suffocating, incomprehensible, absolute. Night 2, it began moving, almost hunting, shaping itself around cities and deserts, seas and tunnels. Night 3, for the first time, humans found a way to push back, to hold the darkness at bay with fire, generators, mirrors, and sunlight. And now, on night 4, the first truth is settling in. The darkness learns. It adapts. It watches. It remembers. And it is no longer surprised or slowed by simple light. From my tower, I can already see it. Shadows that once recoiled from floodlights now pause only briefly before creeping closer, twisting along edges, seeking gaps in illumination. The safe zones of last night, streets that held fires, blocks lit with generators, are no longer secure. The darkness flows around lights, moving in angles and folds that defy geometry. It's patient. It waits for humans to blink, to hesitate, to falter. And then it presses forward, testing the edges of fire and electricity with precision. It's no longer a passive obstacle. It's learning the ways we fight and adapting faster than we can. Earlier, I intercepted a transmission from New York. A team of survivors had barricaded a city block with high-powered lamps, mirrors reflecting light into every alleyway and stairwell. They called it a sanctuary, and for hours it held. But as the night deepened, something began to change. The shadows they feared had become aware of their tactics. At first, they crept along the rooftops, hovering just beyond the lamplight, waiting for the humans to move or stumble. Then, one by one, the darkness seemed to fold itself into shapes. Not fully formed, not solid, but perceptible, like black smoke taking form where the light didn't reach. And as the survivors tried to maintain the barricade, the shadows began stretching along the reflective beams, bending light, dimming lamps with subtle movements, extinguishing candles without wind or touch. The team described it as deliberate, intelligent interference, almost playful, like the darkness was testing them, taunting them, studying exactly how humans fought. Tokyo offered a similar story. Survivors on the skyscraper rooftops, who had relied on sunlight reflected into alleyways during the day, reported that by dusk, the shadows had started climbing the beams of light themselves. The reflected sunlight that once created a corridor of safety now shimmered and wavered, as if the darkness had found a way to partially invade it. Even large groups of floodlights, which had been nearly impregnable on night 3, began to flicker with no cause. Wires untouched, generators intact, bulbs unbroken. And yet, each flicker corresponded with subtle shifts in the darkness outside, probing the new weaknesses, looking for the human error that would allow it entry. The survivors described a chilling realization. The night was no longer just responsive. It was proactive. Here in Halden, I've seen the first signs of what this adaptation means on a small scale. Fire that once held shadows at bay now flickers and twists as if someone, or something, is breathing on it. The edges of my floodlights stretch further than they should, illuminating empty streets, only for darkness to pool into corners I thought secure. I've caught shapes in the reflected beams, shadows moving against the light, undulating, sliding along walls and pavement. They aren't solid, not yet, but they move with purpose, intent, intelligence. They avoid the strongest light, but they find gaps, create new paths, learn where the weak points in the defenses are. The darkness is no longer a blind tide. It's a predator, and it's learning to stalk. A signal from Berlin described a more disturbing phenomenon. Survivors who had fortified an entire district with floodlights and candles watched as the darkness began remembering their defenses. One survivor described how, after an hour, the shadows approached in the exact paths they had avoided before. They replicated the angles and patterns the humans used, moving in a way that mirrored prior behavior, as if the darkness had studied their routines and was now anticipating their every move. Attempts to reposition lights or add new beams caused hesitation, but the darkness adapted quickly, testing again, finding the gaps. According to the report, some survivors had already begun experimenting with randomized illumination, trying to make their defenses unpredictable. Others had begun writing notes, marking the movements of shadows over time, realizing they were documenting an intelligence that evolves faster than any human can. Reports from coastal regions show the same terrifying adaptation. Lighthouses and ship-mounted lights that had pushed back the shadows on night 3 now encounter darkness that curls along beams, bends around horizons, and pools in corners to flank the light rather than confront it head-on. Some sailors report the black ocean responding to the lights, waves appearing to shift against currents, shadows forming within the water that mimic the shapes of vessels. When a flare is fired, the darkness sometimes recoils briefly before surging in another direction, learning the patterns of resistance. It's no longer enough to shine. Now humans must move unpredictably, or the darkness will simply outmaneuver them. The most unsettling reports are from desert and rural areas. Survivors who lit large fires or built signal bonfires across plains and valleys noticed that the darkness doesn't immediately vanish. It retreats, but then returns along unexpected routes, leaving corridors of empty blackness that bypass the light entirely. Entire small communities reported seeing tendrils of shadow crawling along ridges, across fields, following reflective surfaces, bending and splitting, as if the night had discovered a new method to infiltrate. It's learning. Every attempt at light-based defense teaches it, adapts it, and allows it to test human ingenuity. And here I am, sitting in Halden Tower, listening to these reports, adjusting my own lights, recording everything I can. I can feel it pressing against this building even now. The edges of the shadows pooling beneath streetlights, brushing against walls, waiting for me to falter. Every candle, every floodlight, every improvised reflection feels like a fragile wall between me and something alive, something intelligent, something learning at a speed that terrifies me. Night 4 is no longer about panic. It's about strategy, observation, and calculation. The first flickers of hope, human ingenuity, exist, yes. But they exist alongside a force that will adapt, strike, and exploit every weakness. For anyone listening tonight, take this seriously. Every flame matters. Every reflection counts. But be ready to adapt. Be ready to move. The darkness is no longer random. It learns. It watches. It waits for our mistakes. And tonight is the night we understand that survival isn't just about resisting the night. It's about outthinking it. This is Alex Mercer, still broadcasting, still holding the light, still tracking the movements of a darkness that is beginning to understand the world and understand us. This is Alex Mercer, still alive, still broadcasting, and still holding on to the fragile threads of civilization that remain. We are now deep into what the world will remember or forget entirely as the early days of the Blackout. Night 5, Night 6, Night 7. The nights are blending together, each one darker, heavier, and more deliberate than the last. And somewhere in the shadows, I can feel the force that plunged our world into darkness, learning, adapting, hunting. We began Night 5 with hope, or at least a fragile defiance. Humans were discovering countermeasures, light, mirrors, fire, even reflective surfaces to redirect what little sun remained. It was crude, improvisational, but effective. We learned that light could push the darkness back, even if only temporarily. Floodlights on rooftops, candles lined like barricades along streets, generators powering makeshift lamps. These became our weapons, our shields, our prayers. And for the first time across fragments of radio chatter, I heard voices filled with cautious optimism. It didn't last. By Night 6, the darkness had learned. Not slowly, not hesitantly, rapidly, almost cruelly. Shadows that had once recoiled now began slipping under doors, bending around corners, even twisting upward against gravity to approach light sources from angles humans hadn't anticipated. It adapted to mirrors, using reflections to navigate, finding blind spots, exploiting the tiniest gaps in our defenses. Floodlit streets that held last night were overrun, if only for moments, forcing survivors to abandon positions they had counted on. The reports came from every corner of the globe: New York, Berlin, Tokyo, coastal towns, even remote settlements in the mountains. In each case, humans discovered, to their horror, that light was not absolute protection. Candles burned, flares flared, beams of reflected sunlight reached into alleyways, and yet, the darkness learned to circumvent, to twist, to probe, to wait. It was no longer just moving, it was strategizing. I remember a transmission from a survivor in northern Tokyo. She spoke quietly, almost mechanically, describing how the darkness moved along the sides of buildings, lingering in reflective surfaces, crawling up street signs, bending around obstacles in ways that seemed impossible. "It's like it knows what we're doing before we do it," she said, voice shaking. And she wasn't exaggerating. Another broadcast came from Berlin. Survivors had barricaded a block with powerful generators and mirrors reflecting every angle. At first, it worked. The darkness approached, paused, recoiled, and then adapted. It began sliding along beams, pooling just beyond barriers, creating gaps, pressing against their defenses in subtle ways they couldn't immediately see. They tried to outsmart it with randomness, with improvised light patterns, but even that was learned, eventually studied and anticipated. And I know that in Halden, I see the same patterns. Fire flickers, shadows twist, darkness bending and folding around the edges of every glow I set up. By night 7, the world had shifted again. The first 3 nights were a test. Night 5 gave us hope. Night 6 showed us how quickly that hope could be challenged. Night 7 revealed the reality. The blackout wasn't going to end. Sunlight itself began failing to pierce the sky as it once did. Days became elongated nights. The world plunged into indefinite darkness, and humans were left to adapt, or perish. Environmental effects became undeniable. Temperatures plummeted in areas that should have retained heat. Magnetic anomalies disrupted compasses, GPS devices, even radios in some places. Rivers, lakes, and seas seemed to lose their normal reflections, becoming pitch black, bottomless voids. Wildlife began to disappear. Even insects, birds, and mammals vanished in patterns that defied reason. The planet itself was unmoored. Survivors across continents attempted to coordinate. Messages flickered across the airwaves. Small clusters of humanity experimenting with signal fires, flares, mirrors, generators, and improvised networks. Attempts were made to map the darkness, to predict it, to corral it, but the sheer scale of it made coordination nearly impossible. Reports described people moving in organized groups, shining light along streets in sequences, using flares and beacons to signal safe paths. But the darkness continued to adapt, breaking through in ways the humans didn't anticipate, turning even their signals into lures. Some groups succeeded temporarily, others were overrun. Panic was constant. Exhaustion became a disease. Hallucinations, paranoia, and fear-induced violence were rampant. Every light became both hope and potential death trap, and every shadow a lesson in how quickly we could fail. I've watched it here in Halden. Fires flare across rooftops. Generators hum in futile defense. Reflective panels scatter light in every direction. And yet, the darkness moves in waves now, coordinated, deliberate. It presses not only into streets, but across entire city blocks, connecting with empty lots, parks and abandoned buildings to flank human positions. Some shadows seem to move in tandem, forming new shapes entirely. Shapes that don't belong to anything living, but that feel aware, deliberate, intelligent. I've counted these movements, noted them, recorded them, and still I cannot predict them fully. The darkness adapts faster than we can plan. Every attempt to hold territory teaches it new rules, and still, hope exists. Tiny, flickering, fragile hope. Night 7, despite all evidence, has shown that humanity is capable of learning too. Groups across the world are starting to experiment with advanced coordination, rotating lights, signal relays, reflective networks spanning streets and rooftops. Small victories occur. Shadows retreat from isolated areas. Fire continues to burn. Signals survive long enough for people to regroup, plan, and move. But each small success comes at a cost. Resources are limited. Generators fail. Candles burn out. Fatigue crushes the body and mind alike. And the darkness does not forget. It remembers, it adapts, and it is relentless. So as I sit here on Halden Tower, listening to the crackle of distant broadcasts, scanning the faint glows of human resilience across streets and rooftops, I realize the truth. This is no longer just a blackout. This is a war of adaptation, strategy, and survival. The first nights were panic. The middle nights were defiance. Now, we are learning endurance. We are learning adaptation. And the nights stretch endlessly before us. Each one a test of human ingenuity and courage against a force that is neither natural nor predictable. To anyone listening, hold your fires, coordinate your lights, and trust your instincts. Map the darkness, learn its patterns. Every beam of light, every reflection, every small act of ingenuity may be the difference between surviving until sunrise or never seeing it again. The world has changed, and the rules have changed. The darkness is not merely a void. It is learning. It is alive. It is patient. And it will continue to evolve until we either do the same or it consumes what remains of us entirely. This is Alex Mercer, signing off for now. Keep your fires burning, your lights close, and your wits sharper. The night is learning, watching, and waiting, but so are we. Stay alive, stay alert, and remember, darkness is patient, but we are not powerless.